for climate justice. My name is Shilpita Matthews, and I'm an Operation NOAA trustee. I'm also a member of Young Christian Climate Network, a network of young Christians in the UK. It's a pleasure to be your guide this evening as we hear from inspiring leaders across the Anglican Communion who will be sharing their insights about the steps that churches are taking and still need to take on divestment and investment ahead of COP26 in Glasgow this November. In the face of the climate crisis, our faith plays a central role as we seek the purposes of God in seeking justice, loving our neighbours, taking responsibility, and acting with hope in our communities. Across the Anglican Communion, churches are supporting a just and green recovery by divesting from fossil fuels and investing in clean alternatives. Wherever you're joining us from today, this webinar will provide an excellent opportunity to find out how you can get involved in campaigning for divestment in your local church, as well as at the diocese and national level. Tonight, we have some of the most premier speakers in the field from across the UK as well as around the world. Our speakers will be sharing their experiences and insights, which will be followed by a call to action led by Reverend Rachel Mash and Bokani Shitzi, who's Operation NOAA's Right Now campaign officer. There'll also be an engaging Q&A panel where you'll have a chance to ask questions to all of our speakers. Now, if you have a question this evening, we would like to ask you to please write it down in the chat box, if possible, putting the letter Q at the start to help us identify any questions. We'll be writing all of these down during the session and get through as many of them as we can during the Q&A panel. You would also have been automatically muted when joining this event, so you will only be able to see and hear the webinar speakers in speaker view when they come to speak. But the chat function will be available to you throughout the evening, so please do drop your questions in there. Finally, before we begin, please do post on social media during the webinar using the hashtag AnglicansDivest, which we'll be using all through this evening. With that, let me introduce you to our first speaker of the evening. Our first speaker of tonight, Reverend Dr. Rachel Mash. Rachel is the Environmental Coordinator of the Anglican Church of Southern Africa and Secretary to the Anglican Communion Environmental Network. She founded the Green Anglicans movement, which has spread from South Africa to Swaziland, Lesotho, Angola, Mozambique, and Namibia. She sits on the steering group of the Season of Creation. Rachel played a critical supporting role in the Anglican Church of Southern Africa, passing a resolution to divest from fossil fuels in 2016. Rachel will speak about the theological underpinnings of divestment and the Anglican Church of Southern Africa's decision to divest. Rachel, over to you.
Thank you very much, and it's wonderful to be with so many people this evening and to share a little bit of our experience in the Anglican Church of Southern Africa in terms of divesting from fossil fuels. The Anglican Church of Southern Africa is made up of 6 countries, which is South Africa, Swaziland, Lesotho, Namibia, Angola, and Mozambique. And if you can just indicate, are you seeing my screen okay? Yes, in 2016, we took the decision to divest from fossil fuels. And Bishop Elena, who was the very first Anglican bishop in Southern Africa, in fact, she proposed the motion. Sadly, she passed away from COVID, and I wanted to honor her and start our evening with a prayer that she wrote. Let us pray for the planet. Creator God, we thank and praise you for giving us the opportunity to be co-creators with you and to ensure the sustainability of Mother Earth, our meeting place with God. God, as a community of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, teach us as the Anglican community to work together with mutual respect with one another and your creation. We repent for our negligence, leading the earth to be in peril from loss of habitats and species. Help us to be caretakers of your gifts, protecting the land from abuse and ready to share with all in need. So what was the theological basis for us taking the decision to divest? Matthew 25 tells us, "For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me." For many years in Southern Africa, we have been responding to disasters, flooding in Mozambique and droughts in Namibia particularly. And we said that we need to do something to take our part in combating these. In Namibia 3 years ago, there was a very severe drought, and the government told people that they had to come and bring their cows to be slaughtered because there was no food for them. In northern Namibia, most people don't have banks. Their cows are their banks. Their cows they save for the future, when there's a funeral or when there is a wedding or the education of their children. And when they were told that they had to slaughter their cows, many of the elder generation, the old men, actually wanted to commit suicide. Then the following year, we saw Hurricane Idai in Mozambique. The city of Beira in northern Mozambique has said that it is the first major city in the world to be completely devastated by climate change. As the warming seas heated up the oceans, supercharging the hurricane. And the city of Beira, because of sea level rise, is now below sea level. And you can see in this picture, people's farms, people's homesteads, an entire harvest that was wiped out by Hurricane Idai. Our challenge is, what can we do to stop millions more from becoming hungry? What can we do to help those who are impacted by drought, by sea level rise, and by flooding caused by climate change? The second theological point is that we need to speak up for those who have no voice in Proverbs 31, verse 8. In northern Mozambique, we currently have a humanitarian crisis of more than 700,000 people. What has caused this is the fact that they are insurgents who have joined Al-Shabaab, who are chasing people out of their homes. Many people have been murdered, even decapitated. Young children as young as 11 years old have had their heads decapitated. Here's Bishop Ernesto, who works in northern Mozambique. Mozambique is one of the poorest countries in the world and is the holder of the 3 largest liquid natural gas projects in Africa. As is the case right across Africa, local people are excluded from the wealth generated by the extractive industries. Bishop Ernesto says the conflict is not in the whole of northern Mozambique. The conflict is in the 9 districts of Cabo Delgado around the oil fields, including Total and ExxonMobil, who own these oil fields. Young people angry at the poverty that they experience while they see multinationals taking the money from the gas out of the country to their shareholders are wide open for recruitment into Al-Shabaab, which means youth in Arabic. And the diocese of Nampula now and Nyasa are taking in tens of thousands of refugees who are fleeing from this violence, which is caused by this inequality. In Namibia, we are now dealing with another oil company, Recon Africa, which is a Canadian company. They, through bribes or whatever, they have managed to get drilling rights for 35,000 square kilometers. They have already started exploratory drilling. Their plans to frack in northern Namibia, Botswana, and Angola could affect the shared water resources across southern Africa. Bishop Luke Pato brought this plea to the Synod of Bishops, and they wrote a petition, which we handed in 2 weeks ago to the Consul of Namibia, to stop the drilling in the Kavango Basin. Namibia is the driest country south of the Sahara. This oil company, like oil companies across the continent, is trampling the rights of indigenous people. Public participation processes have been ignored. Bishop Luke woke up one day to find out that the exploratory drilling had already begun before the people of Namibia knew about it. Recon Africa is saying one thing to investors. They have promised their investors that they will do fracking, and yet they say to the Namibian public that they will not do fracking. The national newspaper, the Namibian Sun, that broke the story is being threatened with being sued. The National Geographic is being threatened with being sued. We are afraid of the potential damage to groundwater across that area and the impact on the Okavango Delta, which is one of God's beautiful ecosystems. The petition was taken to Canada and was signed off by the Archbishop of Canada and by other friends in Canada who said that they would go and protest on the steps of the headquarters of Recon Africa, and they would take the issue to the parliamentarians in the Canadian government. When we heard that, I sat at my computer and I wept tears of joy, because you feel like you're fighting these huge fossil fuel companies. And when you hear that somebody on the other side of the world hears what you are saying and believes it and is standing in solidarity with the people who are being oppressed by fossil fuel companies, then it gives you hope again. So we are pleading with you tonight to please divest from fossil fuels. Firstly, to speed up the transition from fossil fuels and help us to combat climate change. But divestment for the people who are being oppressed by fossil fuel companies gives us hope. We no longer feel alone if we know that people are joining the divestment campaigns, and you will be giving a voice to the voiceless. And in the words of Archbishop Tutu, people of conscience need to break their ties with corporations who are financing the injustice of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, for your eye-opening presentation and all the work you've been doing in this movement. We now have 221 people on the call with us, so welcome for those of you who've just joined during Rachel's presentation. It's lovely to have you with us tonight, and you're just in time for our keynote speaker, Right Reverend Dr. Stephen Croft. Bishop Stephen Croft is the Bishop of Oxford. He studied classics and theology at Worcester College, Oxford, before studying for the priesthood at Cranmer Hall in Durham. Bishop Stephen's ministry has taken him from London to Yorkshire to Durham before returning to Oxford. In 2009, he was consecrated Bishop of Sheffield before becoming the Bishop of Oxford in 2016. Bishop Stephen is a member of the House of Lords. He is one of 2 bishops elected to the Archbishop's Council and chair of the Church of England's Ministry Council. Bishop Stephen has been a leading advocate for action on the climate crisis, and he proposed an amendment on fossil fuel divestment at the Church of England General Synod in July 2018. He'll be speaking to us on fossil fuel divestment, positive investment, and the urgent need for a just and green recovery from COVID-19. Bishop Stephen, welcome.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. I'm going to share a screen and give you a presentation to look at as well. It's lovely to be with you, a huge privilege to speak, and I'm always conscious in speaking of this. I'm speaking on behalf of a great team of people here in Oxford that I work with, and so many people helping to advance this agenda and encouraging me and teaching me a great deal. But I'm sure we would agree that even in the midst of COVID and COVID recovery, which God willing we will see, it is absolutely vital ethically and politically to keep our focus clearly on the waves which will follow. Most people here will have seen a version of this cartoon by Graham Mackay, which was first published just over a year ago on the day the World Health Organization declared a pandemic, and it's been reproduced in all kinds of different formats with lots of different waves substituted, but this is Graham Mackay's second version. And it captures brilliantly, I think, the truth that the world faces many different threats. but of them, the most present and serious is undoubtedly the threat of irreversible climate change and consequent loss of biodiversity, already, as Rachel has said so eloquently, a present reality in so many parts of the world, and acutely so. When I moved from Sheffield to Oxford just around 5 years ago, I was delighted to be invited to join the advisory board of the University of Oxford's Environmental Change Institute, the ECI. The ECI is an interdisciplinary centre within the university, and it draws students from all over the world in climate sciences and social sciences, mainly to do postgraduate degrees. It also has a range of other activities, including one fascinating seminar I took part in with the lead climate change negotiators from developing nations all over the world. They come here to be skilled and to talk together. So I was asked onto this advisory board, and I was surprised, humbled, shocked even, to discover the serious attention that was paid by the advisory board while I was part of it in every single meeting to the role of the churches and the faith communities globally in combating climate change. Every meeting, people wanted to know what the churches and the faith communities were doing and how they could engage more accurately and precisely with the faith communities. And it reinforced to me over several years that the whole world, really, certainly the educated world in terms of climate change, sees our contribution to this debate as absolutely vital, because it's ethically based, globally connected, and at its best, it's both passionate and well-informed. And those, I think, are all marks, and should be, of Anglican and Christian engagement with these issues. So my encouragement tonight is for all of us to continue to speak to this issue, both within our churches and beyond the church, in this very critical year of engagement. So others are going to give different perspectives from different churches, but what is happening across the Church of England and the Diocese of Oxford in this year of COP26? I can report an increased urgency and profile for climate change issues, but the level of engagement and attention and resource does not yet match the importance of the question. There is still a very long way to travel. So gatherings and networks like this are really critical. So is the encouragement of sisters and brothers across the Anglican Communion. We do thank you for your presence and time with us this evening. A year ago, our General Synod passed a motion calling for a target of net zero by 2030 for the Church of England. This was a surprise that the Synod passed this motion, bringing forward the original target in the motion from 2045, and a huge encouragement. And there's been a great deal of activity across dioceses, across a number of fronts, to explore what that will mean. And the momentum, I think, is growing despite the constraints and the challenges of COVID. As was said, the General Synod debated divestment in the last major way in July 2018. And our national investment policies are pursuing a policy of active engagement with a view to encouraging change and transformation, combined with divestment from companies without a clear trajectory to net zero. And as was mentioned a few moments ago, I presented a motion in 2018 in that debate from the Oxford Diocese with colleagues, urging divestment from fossil fuel companies by the end of 2020 on ethical grounds. The Synod didn't pass that amendment, but passed a related one, pushing the horizon back to 2023. I would have preferred the more demanding target, undoubtedly. Nevertheless, I want to pay tribute to the amount that has been achieved through pursuing engagement combined with the threat of divestment, particularly through the Transitions Pathway initiative. And these are some of the stats nationally. In 2020, last year, our pensions board, with others, actively engaged on these issues with more than 630 companies. The carbon intensity of the board's investment at 42.3% below at the benchmark. 9 companies were restricted by our national investment bodies in 2020, and 37 companies are the focus at the latest hurdle and in scope for that divestment. Although I would prefer a closer horizon for that divestment, I also applaud the outstanding work of our team and the clear progress being made both with fossil fuel companies and with mining companies. A hallmark of the team's work is collaboration with other churches and other companies to increase and multiply traction, and a commitment to continuous improvement. So the TPI, the Transitions Pathway Initiative, is a much more robust tool for holding companies to account than it was in 2018. It's getting better all the time. And the key division for me is between those who realise the present and future danger of catastrophic climate change and those who do not. That's the key division. And there are still many members of our churches in the second group. The key division is not, for me, between those who advocate divestment and those who advocate engagement. Both groups are working towards the same ends with urgency and skill, though of course it's legitimate to debate the different merits of each choice. In the Diocese of Oxford, we've now established an environmental task group led by my colleague, Bishop Olivia, Bishop of Reading, who's here this evening, and drawing together a wide range of expertise. And our task group within the diocese is working on a wide range of fronts: theological, educational, practical and political, to raise the profile of these issues. We now have the beginnings of an eco-hub on our diocesan website, and the ability for churches to begin to chart a pathway to net zero. Our own diocesan synod committed to a target of 2035, and we really mean it, and we are trying to map out the steps we need to take to get there. We're making, as a diocese, a significant investment in our specialist team with 2 full-time posts working in this area, and in resources to enable parishes to invest in energy audits to give the leg up. But setting a priority of climate change and care for the earth demands the whole senior team being on board, not just the bishop and a few enthusiasts, but the whole senior team, and each working in these areas to prioritise those areas. In terms of our own divestment, as a diocese, I'm very pleased that we've made this announcement today. The Diocese of Oxford, like many organisations with equity investments, had investments in fossil fuel companies. Given the strong stance we've taken on the climate emergency, Bishops' Council decided in December to disinvest from such companies, and this has already happened. As of today, we now have no direct investment in the oil and gas producers sector, and passed the test for the areas exclusion of companies, etc. You can read the rest of that for yourselves. And you'll see from the report that our policies include continued engagement and continued investment in renewable energies. So divestment, engagement, investment in renewables. There's absolutely no room for complacency, as all of us know. We're just beginning at the scale of change needed. And we plan to use the opportunity of the UK co-hosting COP this year, both to speak to the churches of our own diocese, to get everyone on board, and to speak to the institutions of our region about their own environmental engagement. My own learning and engagement continues as a member of the House of Lords and as one of several Lords Spiritual leading in this area and engaging actively as a member of an organisation called Peers for the Planet, which is now the single largest network of peers in the House of Lords in the UK on any issue. It was founded just over a year ago. And finally, it's just important to say that our vision and our engagement with all of these issues as a diocese flows from our vision to be a more Christ-like church for the sake of God's world, contemplative, compassionate, and courageous. And we don't think we've arrived. We think we've just begun, and we look forward to learning from others here this evening.
Bishop Stephen, thank you very much for your leadership and inspiring message to us tonight to divest, engage, and invest. It's very encouraging to hear from you and have all of your colleagues join us as well, including Bishop Olivia on the call. Now, as we move a bit further in tonight's program, I have a very exciting guest join us all the way from New Zealand. And bear with me as I share her presentation to you. Very understandably, given the time zone difference, we have a recorded message from Jacinthia. Jacinthia is from the Anglican Church in New Zealand and Polynesia. A quick introduction before I play this video to you. Jacinthia spent a number of years in Australia, first in Sydney and then in Brisbane, Queensland. While there, Jacinthia delivered programs for Maori Radio at the Ethnic Broadcasting Association of Queensland, after which she returned to New Zealand. Jacinthia currently divides her roles as a parish priest and the Operations Support Manager in the General Synod Office. Her video will cover the impact of the climate crisis in the Pacific Islands and the decision of the Anglican Church in Aotearoa, New Zealand and Polynesia to divest. With that, let me share this video.
Kia ora, and malo elele from the Pacific. The Anglican Church in Aotearoa, New Zealand and Polynesia in 2015 publicly declared these words: "We choose to fight climate change rather than drown, urging collective and immediate action to mitigate the worst effects of climate change with a universally binding agreement." A story of one of those drowning places is here. Pungai Motu, nestled in the Tongatapu Islands of Tonga. Archbishop Emeritus Winston Halapua shared this story. "The areas that I walked and fished as a boy with my father, seeking food for our family on the island of Pungai Motu, have now gone. The rising sea level speaks loudly for action, and for some of us in Polynesia, the truth is very real. Our land and our livelihood are drowning, and others refuse to see it," he said. "How can we tell our grandchildren the home they were to inherit has been destroyed?" Pungai Motu. Local residents have tried to create a protective barrier around the island by planting mangroves along the coastline, but the ocean is winning that battle. Some of the mangroves were starting to grow, but it would be a long while before these small saplings could offer any protection for the island. Sandbags too have not been enough. Palm trees now bereft of the long green fronds that adorn their crest. Drinking water being boated in, and crops to harvest nowhere in sight. Our province continues to appeal to its global networks to consider how their collective efforts in sustainability is still not enough. Equally, at each sitting of Synod, our province has intentionally locked into often difficult discussions on how to improve our own efforts. We have viewed our ongoing investments in the fossil fuel industry to be contrary to the Church's missional goals of the care of creation and social justice, and contrary to its responsibilities and commitments as an ethical investor. Concerned that there were still fossil fuel investments in several of our church investment entities existed, we moved that there be a requirement that these bodies assess whether they had any fossil fuel investments in their portfolios, and if they did, they were to develop plans to divest them and report those plans to the provincial governing body frequently. In light of this, the province's commitment for close to full divestment by 2020 was realistic. That report is yet to be submitted. Joining the government's plan for zero carbon emissions by 2050 is ongoing. A framework to enhance resilience to climate change and disasters by 2025 is the development of taking climate action into our hands. These include technological, theological, and philosophical components that articulates the Māori and Polynesian concepts of mātauranga, education, whanaungatanga, collective, kaitiakitanga, good stewardship, and manakitanga, care for others. Pungai motu, we know that human activity has upset your delicate balance of physical and ecological systems upon which all life depends, and that humanity is beginning to reap what it has sown. We recognize that it's up to us to take action rather than drown. We know that it's up to us to divest fossil fuel investments. We acknowledge that it's up to us to advocate for global change on your behalf. It's up to us as God's people to fulfill our promise to be morally and ethically mindful of our environment through our actions, words, and deeds. It's up to all of us. The Anglican Church of Aotearoa, New Zealand and Polynesia has declared this: the earth is God's gift to humanity and to all creatures. We forcefully reject the notion that our being created in God's image and given dominion over the earth justifies absolute domination over all other living things. As humans endowed with reason, we are not the controllers and possessors of nature, but its servants, just as we are servants of each other and of God. Jesus calls us to love our neighbour, and in the same spirit the needs of islands like Pungai Motu, who are acutely vulnerable to climate impacts. We give thanks for the gifts in creation, for our world, land, its beauty and its resources. Keep us from being content with things as they are, and that there may come a creative compassion, a thirst for justice, and a willingness to give of ourselves in the spirit of Christ. Amen.
What a beautiful and moving call to action from Jacinthia to us all the way from New Zealand tonight. Well, as we take some time to pause and digest Jacynthia's video, let me introduce to you our next speaker of the evening, James Buchanan. James has been the Bright Now campaign manager at Operation Noah since 2016, having previously worked at Christian Aid, CAFOD, and the Church of England, where he coordinated the pilgrimage to Paris ahead of the UN climate talks in 2015. James will share with us the key findings of Operation Noah's latest report, Church Investments in Major Oil Companies, Paris Compliant or Paris Defiant. James, over to you.
Thank you, Shulpita, and thank you very much to Bishop Stephen and to Rachel and to Jacinthia for those inspiring talks, and to all the other panelists this evening for your leadership on this issue across the Anglican Communion. So I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully you will all see this okay. Okay, so I hope you can see this. So as Shulpita said, I'm going to be speaking a bit about our report. If I were to sort of summarize the key findings in a nutshell, whether oil companies are Paris compliant or Paris defiant, well, as you might possibly guess, we concluded that none of them are compliant with the Paris Agreement. First of all, I'd like to say thank you very much to all of you who've supported the campaign for churches to divest. And thanks to your support, we've made real strides forward in the last few years, although there is, of course, further to go. In this photo, you can see All Hallows Church in Leeds, which divested from fossil fuels in 2019. And while we recognise the efforts of those pursuing engagement with fossil fuel companies, we believe that this engagement is unlikely to bring about change at the pace that is required to avoid the worst effects of the climate crisis. And there are a number of reasons for this. The first one is that oil and gas companies are spending huge sums, trillions of dollars in the next decade, on the exploration and extraction of new reserves of fossil fuels, when the vast majority of known reserves need to remain in the ground. While a number of oil and gas companies have announced net zero ambitions, many at the same time are looking to increase fossil fuel production. There was a Guardian article last month showing that Shell is planning to increase gas production by 20% in the next few years. And Shell on its website, on the same page in which it talks about its net zero carbon footprint ambition, says, "We will also sell more gas." As well as this, the largest oil and gas companies are also spending huge sums in lobbying against climate action. Some research by Influence Map, which was published in The Guardian a couple of years ago, showed that the 5 largest publicly listed oil and gas companies, including BP, Shell and Total, are spending between them $200 million per year to block, control and delay climate policies. And BP and Shell are members of trade associations such as the American Petroleum Institute, which have successfully lobbied for weaker environmental regulations during the COVID crisis. And I think when you look at the advertising of the fossil fuel industry, I think often you have the impression that they're quickly becoming renewable energy companies. But in fact, as Influence Map showed in its research, oil and gas companies plan to spend an average of just 3% of their capital expenditure on low carbon projects in 2019, meaning that they were planning to spend 97% of their capital expenditure on exploration and extraction of oil and gas. We often get asked the question, does engagement work? Is it effective? And this quote, well, even the oil companies themselves are actually saying that divestment works. This quote is from Shell's annual report in 2018. They said, "Some groups are pressuring certain investors to divest their investments in fossil fuel companies. If this were to continue, it could have a material adverse effect on the price of our securities and our ability to access equity capital markets." So in other words, it makes it more expensive for oil and gas companies to continue pursuing new oil and gas exploration and extraction projects. There's also a growing financial risk of investing in fossil fuel companies, and a growing number of investors are actually dropping their investments in fossil fuel companies for this reason. For example, last summer, it was reported that CCLA Investment Management, which manages investments on behalf of many Church of England dioceses and local churches, has dropped its investments in Shell and Total, its last remaining fossil fuel investments, for financial reasons, because they concluded that these were no longer a good investment. And this makes it much easier for local churches and also for local dioceses to make commitments to divest from fossil fuels. So we hope that many of your dioceses, particularly those of you in the Church of England, will follow the lead of the Diocese of Oxford in deciding to publicly announce a commitment to divest from fossil fuels. This year is especially important because, as you will know, the UN climate talks are taking place in Glasgow in November. So churches across the UK and across the whole Anglican Communion have a key role to play in building momentum ahead of COP26 and supporting a just and green recovery from COVID-19. And Cristiana Figueres, who is the UN climate chief during the UN climate talks in Paris, has said that these decisions about whether investments go into high carbon industries or rather than that, that go to help reduce emissions, that those are the most important decision that we will make on the climate crisis. Several churches, as you'll be aware, have recognised the climate emergency. This photo is of a group in the Diocese of Bristol, which brought that proposal that Bishop Stephen talked about, calling on the Church of England to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2030. But there is still further to go across much of the church on fossil fuel divestment. Here you can see a bit of an overview of where the different church denominations in the UK are on divestment, although there's some exciting news from yesterday as well. The Baptist Union at Baptist Union Council voted to divest from fossil fuel companies. 98.5% of Baptist Union Council members voted in favour of divestment, which is wonderful news. The Church of Ireland, as you'll hear from Stephen in a bit, has fully divested. There's further to go in the Church of England, Church in Wales, and the Scottish Episcopal Church, and you'll hear about all of those in a moment as well. At Operation Noah, we campaigned very actively ahead of the Church of England General Synod, which Bishop Stephen mentioned. And in this photo, you can see there were more than 6,000 people who signed a petition ahead of the Church of England General Synod, calling on the Church of England to fully divest from fossil fuel companies. And this was handing in the petitions to Adam Matthews from the Church of England Pensions Board. At the General Synod, as Bishop Stephen mentioned, Synod members voted for an amendment which supported divestment from fossil fuel companies not aligned with the Paris Agreement by 2023. But there was also a part in there which said that they would start divestment in 2020 from companies that are not taking seriously their responsibilities in the transition to a low carbon economy. And so it's been disappointing and surprising that the church commissioners are continuing to invest in ExxonMobil, which is a company that, according to Harvard research, knew about the impact of the climate crisis for decades and yet misled the public. And ExxonMobil also blocked resolutions on climate change from the church commissioners at its AGM in 2019 and in 2020. So really the Church of England church commissioners need to divest from Exxon now. At Operation Noah, we've worked with other organisations, including Green Anglicans, the organisation that Rachel works for, the World Council of Churches, the Global Catholic Climate Movement, and Green Faith on a series of global divestment announcements. And last May, 42 faith institutions from 14 countries announced their divestment from fossil fuels, with 21 of those institutions from the UK. The next global divestment announcement is going to be happening on the 17th of May this year, and we'd be really delighted if any of your local churches or dioceses or equivalents in other churches would be interested in participating. So in terms of what is involved to make a divestment commitment, the groups interested in joining the announcement confirm that they've either divested from fossil fuel companies, from fossil fuel investments, and will not invest in fossil fuels in the future, or that they will divest any fossil fuel investments as soon as possible and within 5 years at the latest. I'd like to just signpost you to a useful resource, the Divest Your Church step-by-step guide on the Bright Now website, which gives a bit more information about how you can divest from fossil fuels in practice. I'd like to just end with a quote from Rowan Williams, the former Archbishop of Canterbury and the Chair of Christian Aid. He said, "Divestment will send a positive and hopeful message to the people of this country and to those in vulnerable communities across the globe who will be most immediately affected by climate-related disasters." So thank you very much for listening, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, James, for sharing these insightful findings. I'm sure we'll discuss a lot more of the findings from the report during the Q&A session. Now, may I invite the Very Reverend John Conway to please begin the next presentation. A short introduction for our guest tonight. John is Provost of St. Mary's Episcopal Cathedral in Edinburgh since 2017, the first cathedral in the world to divest from fossil fuels. After curacy at St. Mary's Cathedral, he moved in 2001 to be rector of St. Martin's of Tours Episcopal Church. During his 16 years there, he helped establish the St. Martin's Community Resource Centre and was also the co-convener of Edinburgh Interfaith Association and convener of the Diocesan Mission and Ministry Committee. He will share with us today how St. Mary's divested from fossil fuels and what needs to happen now in the Scottish Episcopal Church and the importance of divestment ahead of COP26 in Glasgow. John, over to you.
Thank you very much, Shapita. It's lovely to be with you all, and thank you for this opportunity to talk to you all. As Provost of the Anglican Cathedral in Scotland's capital city, I want to begin by assuring you that we are acutely aware that the eyes of the world will be focused on the UK in November and on Glasgow and COP26 in particular. We are very conscious of the responsibility that comes with that we are welcoming the world to Glasgow, and there is a need to ensure the voices of those most affected by climate change are heard loud and strong, as we've heard this evening. And above all, that action flows from that gathering. The time is short and the need is pressing. We are busy organising events around COP26 to ensure that momentum is built up and that we are ready to hear the cry. We are hoping to pilgrimage from Edinburgh to Glasgow in the build-up to COP26, for instance, in the company of all those thinking creatively and sustainably how we might organise our common life. But that pilgrimage will not just be to COP26, but even more importantly, from COP26. We need to lay the platform now so that the injection of energy and purpose that we hope and pray COP26 provides can be quickly picked up and put into action. So it's in that context, knowing that the UK is hosting this most important gathering, that we also know we can only speak and support those who are bringing their own stories and demands if we have begun to get our own house in order. And that is beginning to happen. In June 2019, the Scottish Episcopal Church passed a motion at its General Synod, which included the action point, "There be formed an ethical investment advisory group to develop a strategy to enable the Scottish Episcopal Church to completely disinvest from unethical sources of revenue." And the motion made it clear that unethical was understood to include investments in fossil fuel extraction companies. And at its most recent General Synod last December, the Episcopal Church began the process of setting the challenging target of making our church net zero by 2030. It asked in that motion to be presented with the demands that that target would make upon us and the resources that we might draw upon to fulfill it at its next synod in June. And at that synod, with those demands and those resources before us, we very much hope that the motion will be passed, which commits us to meeting that target. I think it's really important that we're clear that both divestment and even more a target of net zero by 2030 are not straightforward. But we need to move beyond talking to action and an engagement with the knotty issues that each of them present. On divestment, the first steps are relatively easy. The Cathedral in September 2019 asked our investment managers to divest from any direct holdings in fossil fuel extraction companies, and that was done. A similar move was enacted by the Scottish Episcopal Churches Investment Committee, with the last direct holding in a fossil fuel extraction company being sold by September 2020. Those first moves on divestment enabled the Cathedral in September 2019 to sign one of the global divestment announcements that James just talked about. And since then, many Scottish churches and leaders have signed the Scottish Churches COP26 Pledge that's been enabled by Eco-Congregation Scotland. Such pledges are vital in building up the momentum for change, because after the initial moves, we get to the hard part. Most of the Scottish Episcopal Churches funds, and those of the Cathedral, because we're a very small denomination, are held in pooled investments. We're not like the Church of England, who have, as we've heard, somewhat of a policy of direct engagement. We don't have the funds to have that kind of leverage. Our money is pooled with lots of other individuals and organisations in ways that spread the risk and cut down on management costs. Such pooled funds, however, are more complicated, as the pledge acknowledges. The pledge envisages a maximum of 5 years to find ways to divest totally from fossil fuel extraction via those pooled funds. And more importantly, to invest in positive ways that will help underpin the green recovery and sustainable economy that we all want to see coming out of COVID. So we're in that task, along with the Episcopal Church as a whole, of finding the financial vehicles to enable us to deliver on that pledge. And what we find is, particularly in the cautious world of investment, that the vehicles for such investment are not readily available, particularly to institutions, as I've mentioned, like the Episcopal Church and the Cathedral, who in relative terms have small amounts to invest. It's analogous to the situation that many of us find ourselves in relation to pension funds. For many, that is effectively one of the largest investments in which each of us personally have a stake. But finding pension funds that are divested from fossil fuels, and not just from their extraction, but from the wider fossil fuel economy, is not straightforward. It's not yet mainstream. And that is the need for change. The Episcopal Church's Ethical Advisor Group is now doing the work of researching and recommending those positive investment vehicles. And we're working with other churches across the world on those. And the Cathedral will utilise that research too. But that research is about effecting a wider change in the financial services industry. That's what the move toward divestment, the signing of pledges, the withdrawal of direct investment is all about. It's being part of a wider movement that creates the momentum to effect change in what is a huge financial services industry, so that positive ethical investment becomes much more mainstream, much more available, much more part of the way all of us are enabled to operate, part of a huge shift in the way in which our economies as a whole are run. And the same is even more true of pledges to become net zero by 2030. By ourselves, such a pledge will probably be unfeasibly expensive to a small denomination like the Episcopal Church. The technological solutions are still not readily available, particularly to awkward buildings like churches. And if any of you know my own cathedral here in Edinburgh, you'll know that attempting to heat it by conventional means, as by sustainable means, is a real challenge. So committing to net zero by 2030 is about laying down a serious marker, but it's about becoming part of a wide movement. It's about getting other churches and, more importantly, wider society capturing the possibility and the challenge of that. So please do sign the pledge tonight if you're in a position to do so. Signal your desire for change. And in that way, we'll gather the momentum to do something about our carbon emissions in a joined up way, not piecemeal, which will be almost impossible, but together as a society, as a country, tackling it all head on. And at COP26, we will be asked if we have begun to rise to that challenge. And so we hope and pray that we can say we are.
Thank you, John, for your pioneering book in Edinburgh and your call for action ahead of COP26. Please do continue sending questions to John as well as the rest of the panel in the chat box. And now we'll be turning to Stuart. Stuart Elliott is a priest in the church in Wales, living in Snowdonia in North Wales. He writes and speaks regularly about the climate crisis and its connection with nature. He can often be found running in the hills when not tending to his flock, that's people, not sheep. Stuart is an associate member of the Iona community and is a member of the Church in Wales Environment Group and the Church in Wales Ethical Investment Group. He'll speak about progress on divestment in the Church in Wales and the importance of investment in climate solutions. Stuart, over to you.
Wel, diolch yn fawr iawn i'r cyfle I siarad o Gymru. Thank you for the chance to speak to you.
Diolch yn fawr.
Right. Oh, diolch. Da iawn, croeso. Wales, as you know, is a small nation, and the church in Wales, a really small province. What good can come out of Wales? Well, in 2015, the Welsh government passed the Future Generations Act. It was the single most innovative piece of legislation to safeguard the well-being of future generations. And at its heart is an understanding of sustainability, which is innovative and holistic. It requires governments and public bodies to scrutinise their work and their policies to ensure that they are fit for the future generations as much as they are for our current generation. Now, though the Church in Wales is not bound by the Future Generations Act, some of us are trying to put those principles into action within the Church. And next month, the governing body of the Church in Wales will meet to discuss, and we hope for the final time, divestment from fossil fuels in our investments. The Church in Wales has taken a long time to get to this point, previously discounting investing in oil from tar sands. Those of us who have been working at the heart of this for some time have shown that shareholder engagement with companies was not having the desired effect. And given that because 2/3 of the known oil reserves must remain unburnt in our efforts to limit warming to 1.5 degrees, continuing to take a profit from companies who were actively seeking more reserves of fossil fuels was morally indefensible. It was also argued financially unsound to invest in companies whose valuations were based on assets they would not be able to realise in the future. And last year, the investment company Saracen dropped its investments in fossil fuels. That all brings us to the future, and the question we should ask is, are we fit for it? We have an opportunity to break with the past now. It's clear that the political and the economic systems need to change, and we need to make a choice. Which way do we go? Divestment is good, but it's not enough. I remember a postcard I saw many years ago which bemoaned the use of plastic spoons, of all things, in a rather ironic fashion. And it read something like this: "Isn't it amazing that our society has reached the point where we believe that the energy needed to extract oil from the ground, ship it to a refinery, mold it to a spoon, distribute it to a shop, buy it, take it home, and use it before throwing it away, is considered to be less than the energy needed just to wash the spoon when we're done with it?" How often, I wonder, do we question the full cost of what we do? Where will the negative screening of our investments end? This is incremental divestment, pushing those who we perceive to hold the power to make small changes, rather than realizing it is us who actually holds the power. Now, I'm not a cartoonist, but I did have an idea last summer for one of those cartoons that you might see in The Economist or some other magazine. It had the economy portrayed as a rather grand throne. The figure sat on it was snoozing away through the pandemic whilst being literally undermined by the ecology. Coming to the end of the pandemic, the economy wakes from its throne and notices what's been going on. And out of the sides of the throne comes those outriggers you get on large vehicles to stabilize themselves. It literally moved the goalposts. Well, the point of that is that we can't just expect to move our investments to clean energy instead of carbon intensive energy, and at the same time to expect to be consumers of the same as we were before, because nothing has really changed. What is actually needed is a reduction of consumption, and at its heart, this is a spiritual issue. You'll remember, I'm sure, the slogan, "Live simply, that others may simply live." I think it's time to change the rules and to start to put our money where our faith is. We have the power to do this, to cut out the consumptive values of our economy. As we're experiencing this evening, connectivity is so important, but is it important to have a new device every 6 months? Our current economic model would say, swap your diesel car for an electric car. But this is economics with having the brakes on. Is an alternative vision to invest heavily in our public transport infrastructure, or have we left it too late? Whatever we do, the environmental costs don't disappear. So what we do needs to be less. I'll leave you with one final image, that of a donut. I'm sure you're aware of the donut model of economics in Kate Raworth's book, which is based on the social baseline and the ecological ceiling. This is a good place to begin, and to put our money and our actions where our faith is, living within planetary bounds and raising up those who are below the social baseline. This is more than divestment or positive investment. It's about understanding the overall system of the earth and living out God's Sabbath.
Thank you, Stuart, for your talk tonight and giving us practical examples for green recovery as we come out of this current pandemic. And now, over to our final presenter of this evening before we go to the much anticipated Q&A session, Stephen True. Stephen is a member of the Church of Ireland based in County Armagh and is a climate change activist and blogger. Stephen and his wife Eileen spent 8 years as South American Mission Society mission partners in Paraguay. In 2018, he successfully campaigned for the Church of Ireland to withdraw its investments from fossil fuel companies as a member of the Church of Ireland General Synod. Stephen, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sapila, and hello everyone from ancient, rainy Ireland today a little bit. It's a real privilege to be able to share with you all. I'm not a member of the clergy. I'm not a bishop. I am just a regular lay person in the Church of Ireland. And I just want to tell you a little bit about the divestment journey that we've been on with 4 headings. about compassion, communication, collaboration, and mission. So starting with compassion. When the flood waters rise, we need to be filled with compassion. When the wildfires rage, we need to burn with a passion for climate justice. Jesus said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor." It was back in 2013 when I saw the devastation of Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines, and in particularly a photo of a young boy called Joshua Cator. I really would encourage you to Google this, Joshua Cator, C-A-T-O-R. He was standing amidst devastation of his village and town. He had lost his sister and his mother in the flood. That photograph and that story filled me with a compassion and ignited something in me for change. The people of the Philippines needed our help, and my church, the Church of Ireland, appealed for people to donate to that cause. But I also found out that our church and our churches were investing in fossil fuels and helping to fuel the very climate crisis that the typhoon was a part of. So my divestment journey began in about 2014. I was voted on to our General Synod the next year, and I thought, what could I do to communicate about this issue? So to communication. A key to unlock change is to communicate the truth. 1 John 3:18 says, "Let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth." I think at Synod, I use the iceberg dead ahead approach, encouraging our church to change direction. And then I began to use every communication channel available. I wrote to our church newspaper, the Church of Ireland Gazette. I started a blog at thetruths.com. I emailed friends. I used social media to share news stories about the climate crisis and investments that churches make. I spoke at diocesan and general synods to warn people about the fact that we were investing in destruction. I tried to communicate two truths. One, that it is not ethical to invest in an industry that is fueling the climate crisis. And two, investment portfolios actually do better without fossil fuels. The next stage was to move on to collaboration. I like this quote from Margaret Mead, who said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." I began with collaboration across dioceses and encouraged people elsewhere to speak at their synods and pass motions calling for change for the church to divest from fossil fuel extraction. I also collaborated with the senior managers of the Church of Ireland in the representative church body, and that helped to change from talk to action. The RCB proposed a motion in 2017 to divest from coal and tar sands. And then I proposed a motion in 2018 to go further and to commit to full divestment. And this was passed by General Synod to commit to a divestment fully from passive and active investments by 2022. And then in collaborating with others, like folk here in Operation Noah, really helped me to connect and to continue to share what I'd learned. The RCB as well collaborated through people like the Church Investors Group or the Transition Pathway Initiative. And this has strengthened engagement to end fossil fuel funding in the likes of by banks and by insurers. So what has been the result? Well, 10 years ago, the Church of Ireland had 10% of its €500 million investment funds invested in fossil fuel extraction. Now it's less than 0.5%, and by next year, the General Synod confirmed last year in December that it will be none. That 2022 goal will be met. The impact of this is that the Church of Ireland's decision generated good positive press coverage and influenced other institutions like the Queen's University in Belfast, and I believe other churches too, like the Church of England, to push further in their divestment journey. And then finally, to mission. How has this changed mission? I am really influenced by the Reverend Dr. Chris Wright, who says, the Bible is just not about the solution to the sin problem and how to survive the day of judgment. It begins with creation and ends with a new creation. Over the last number of years in the Church of Ireland, there's been a real emphasis and a recognition on the 5 marks of mission, which if you've never heard of, I really encourage you to look up. The 5th mark of mission is that we should care for creation. Secondly, there has been a real growing awareness that mission includes climate justice, and we need to work towards helping those people to adapt or who are affected by the climate crisis. And then what are the next steps? In Northern Ireland and Ireland as a whole, we're famous for our green fields, and I like to see that there are green mission fields as well. You know, there are people out there campaigning for change who have no connection with the church. And if we as Christians and church rise up to speak the truth, then they might see and connect with us, and we can share with them the hope that we share in Christ. There are many people who are distressed about the future. We can let them know that in Christ we have a hope of eternal life, and we can have, as part of our mission, the plans to restore the earth as well. And then for the Church of Ireland and its next step, I would really hope that its next synod this September, we make a real commitment towards net zero as well. Not just at some point in the future, but with clear 5-yearly targets, a clear plan to get to zero emissions at the end of the day. That's my prayer, and I really appreciate and thank you for the opportunity to share it with you, and I'm looking forward to any questions that you would have to ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you for showing us how anyone in the congregation can take these first steps towards change. And with that, we're done with the speaker presentations for tonight, and I'd like to invite Rachel and Bukani to share some more information about the next global divestment announcement and other ways you can get involved. This will be followed by our Q&A panel, so make sure to get all your questions in before then. Rachel and Bukani, over to you.
Thank you so much. I hope you can see me. I was going to share a slide with you, and I will do that just now. Please let me know if you can see my screen. Is that all right? Loading. And here we are. Thank you so much. I'm sure you all have been so inspired today by the really great steps that have been taken, and many of you may want to join the next global divestment announcement, that is on May the 17th, please do email me if you are in the UK and would like to know how your local church, your diocese or church organization can be a part of that. And Rachel will be receiving all the other global, because you are so talented, you can handle all the rest of the world's emails. So please do email Rachel if you are emailing from the Global Communion there as well. Perhaps you would also like to engage your local church in a Climate Sunday service. There are plenty of resources there, from prayers and songs and videos, which even in our current online church services can be a really great way to start those conversations and really meet people where they are to discuss the climate crisis and offer that hope, as well as take as resources for practical actions that you may take. And you may also like to use the Climate Emergency Toolkit, which we'll share again in the chat and also in the email that will follow this event as well. And again, that has some really practical step-by-step guide that you may like to use with your church community. So we look forward to hearing from you and really hope you take on this inspiration that you've had from tonight to take those practical steps. Thank you.
Thank you, Bakani and Rachel. And now I'll invite the speaker panel for the most exciting part of our evening, the audience Q&A session. Thanks for sending all your questions so far. We'll begin with short responses. If I could please request each speaker to keep their responses to 1 or 2 minutes each, so we can hear from all the speakers in case people have to head at 8:30, and we can continue a more longer discussion afterwards. So first up, we have a question for Bishop Stephen. Bishop Stephen, while divestment from fossil fuels is essential, it seems that the structural inequality that our economic system depends on and perpetuates is not spoken about enough. In becoming more Christ-like, how can the church fulfill its prophetic vocation and call for bottom-up change?
Thank you very much. An interesting question. And there's already been, we do need a rich discussion about economics in our discussions about climate, and my favourite book has already been referred to tonight, Donut Economics, by Kate Raworth, in terms of a more holistic approach and a more sustainable approach. But I think one of the lessons, the climate crisis is so urgent that we have to communicate to all possible people and economic views urgently. We can't wait until the world is of a similar mind about economics to take the very simple measures we need to take to get to net zero and stop the earth heating up. So whilst I think that economic debate is important, we also in our climate campaigning need to speak the language of the left and the language of the right, to speak to politicians of all parties, to appeal to everybody in the name of the earth and of all the peoples of the earth, to take urgent action irrespective of your economic models. Of course, our economics can inform what we do, but it won't be the only way forward.
Thank you, Bishop. And as an economist myself, I can say donut economics is a concept which I personally find very fascinating as well. The next question is for Rachel. On a similar note, while we agree we should not open any new coal mines, will this stop us from making steel or cement or concrete? How do we discern between these different resources which our society intrinsically depends on?
I think the key thing is that we need to be bending the curve in all these different areas, whether it's agriculture, transport, building. Cement and concrete are hugely intensive in terms of carbon emissions. And one of the exciting things is actually my son is studying architecture, and one of the very exciting things is to see a new generation of young architects who are just passionate about green building. And I think one of the massive things that we can do is to begin to shift towards new materials for building, new ways of building, green building. So we're going to see a massive change over the next few years, but we definitely need to speed that up faster in all areas, and not just around steel or around concrete, but all the different areas, and then we will slowly bend the curve.
Thanks, Rachel. And in terms of moving on to these next steps and thinking out of the box, we have a question here for Stuart. The question asks, how do we move from divestment to positive impact and positive investment channels? Is this bound to be a slow process, and how much time do we have?
There's two issues there, aren't there? The first is moving divestments to those positive investments, and the second is about time. It is possible to move your divestments to positive ways. There are investment organisations that will do that directly for you. If you go to New Economics Foundation, for example, you'll find them advertised. Organisations such as the Triodos Bank, Cooperative Bank, these are organisations that are working in positive investments with communities, in local groups, etc., and in the bigger investments. So yes, it's possible to do it. Have we got time? Well, we're going to be living in a different world, aren't we? And I think we have to do the immediate thing and start taking these actions, but we also have to start understanding that the world is going to be different. And we have to live in different ways. So we start that journey now for the future. And it's not about getting to a certain target and then thinking, phew, it's all over. This is about changing the way we are now to continue to live that way on into the future. It's a very short answer to what could be a very long question.
Thanks, Stuart. And in terms of taking these first steps in the journey, we have a question for Stephen. What challenges did you meet in your journey to divestment, and how did you overcome these?
That's a very good question, because at times it felt like a long journey. I think particularly the way the structures work for a regular person, we're not part of the heart of the committees and so on that make the decisions. It was really 1 year to the next where you had 3 minutes to speak. So that idea of building up the connections with the representative church body, with other interested people around different dioceses, was really key to unlocking change, because those conversations could happen, you know, apart from synod time. So making connections really helped overcome that timeliness that was an issue.
Thanks, Stephen, and thanks for being that standing example that change is possible if you persist with these challenges. And now a similar question for John. Again, as a congregation member, how can I get involved in divestment and addressing the climate crisis ahead of COP26 in Glasgow?
So I think it's about educating yourself, finding out, you know, what are the investments that your particular church holds, either locally or however it organises itself, whether that's within a diocese or nationally. You know, asking the awkward questions of those whose responsibility it is to hold those investments, and asking them, have they considered these questions? What are they doing about it? It's about getting into the nitty-gritty of the detail, actually. And what you discover is when you engage with these people that they're all fairly, you know, people who sit on finance committees tend to be fairly cautious, fairly risk averse. So then it's bringing to those conversations the resources of why these things matter. and reassuring them where they need to be reassured that they're not doing something stupid here, which is why feeling you're part of something much larger is really important. But it's convincing them of the moral imperative of this. That, you know, quite often in church structures, finances sit in this kind of separate little bubble, as if they're not part of our life and what we consider to be important. And so it's making sure that, as somebody who cares about these things, you're engaging with the nitty-gritty of that and convincing them that actually that needs to move in the opposite direction as well, that they need to engage with the purpose of church and the purpose of what we're on the planet for.
Thank you, John. And now over to you, James. Perhaps something that you came across during your report writing. How does the panel rate the decarbonisation programs of oil companies like Shell and BP? For example, Shell has a target of net zero by 2050, whereas BP hopes to invest $2 billion in decarbonisation in 2021.
That's a good question. I mean, there's been an increasing number of announcements from oil and gas companies, as I'm sure people have heard in the last couple of years. But I guess the reality as it is at the moment is that these companies are still investing, as I said before, sort of 95–97% of their capital expenditure on oil and gas, and exploring for new oil and gas reserves when most oil and gas needs to stay in the ground. So I mean, there was, as I say, a Guardian article only last month, saying that Shell is planning to increase gas production by 20% in the next few years. This is just not compatible with the Paris Agreement. And as I said, at the same time as saying that they're in support of the Paris Agreement, a lot of these companies are also members of trade associations that are lobbying against climate action. So I think for all of these reasons, as I say, the time has really come to divest now.
Thanks, James. And unfortunately, I'm conscious of time, and it looks like we have run out of time for all the questions today. Apologies if we didn't get to your specific questions, but may I please invite the audience to join us in thanking all of our speakers this evening with a virtual round of applause using all sorts of Zoom reactions possible. And thank you to you too, from wherever you've joined us tonight, for taking time out. I'm sure you've been inspired by the excellent presentations and insightful contributions from all our leaders tonight on the panel. Well, this brings our webinar to a close. Thanks, and we hope that you've heard and deepened your understanding of why divestment from fossil fuels and investment in clean alternatives is so vital in the climate emergency, and that this is something you take forward in your own churches to make a practical difference. We'd also like to thank our webinar sponsors, the Anglican Communion, Environmental Network, Operation NOAA, Christian Aid, Pure Fund, and Eco Congregation Scotland for hosting tonight's event. We will, of course, be sending an email to everyone who signed up on Eventbrite with the key links in the webinar. And we'd, of course, love for all of you to continue to be involved. So please don't hesitate to get in touch. Well, thank you very much to the speakers again. Thanks everyone for joining us tonight. Take care, and we hope to see you all at future events very soon. Good night.